Welcome to Chemistry with Dr. Z. In this video, I'm going to explain the electrolysis of aqueous solution. So, electrolysis of aqueous solution is more complicated than the electrolysis of molten solids or molten substances because there are two factors here to be considered. So, the first one is that the aqueous solution will not only contain the ions from the solid or the molten solid like we had before, but we are going also to have two other ions, which are the hydrogen ion and the hydroxide ion that come from water because it's an aqueous solution, meaning we have water as well. So now we have two different positively charged ions and two different negatively charged ions. Not all these ions will be oxidized and reduced at the cathode and anode, and we need to know which one will have the preference to be oxidized or reduced. So let's have a look at the cathode. So the cathode is the negatively charged electrode, and there will be two positively charged ions. The first one is the hydrogen from the water. The second one is the metal ion from the dissolved salt. So if the metal ion comes from a metal that is more reactive than hydrogen, which means it's higher up in the reactivity series than hydrogen, something like potassium, sodium, lithium, calcium, and so on, then the hydrogen ions will have the preference to be reduced at the cathode. So the hydrogen ion is the one that's going to react, and then hydrogen as an element will be produced at the cathode. Uh, and then if we have a metal that comes from a metal that is less reactive than hydrogen, lower than hydrogen in the reactivity series, like copper, here it's lower than hydrogen, then this metal will have the preference to be reduced at the cathode. In this case, the elemental metal will be produced and it will coat the cathode. So what's going to happen at the anode? At the anode as well, we are going to have two anions. The first one is OH from, or the hydroxide from water, and the second one is the anion that we are going to have from the salt. So if we have hydroxide ions and the other anion is halide ion, like chloride, bromide, and iodide, then the halide is the one that will be oxidized at the anode. The anode is the positively charged electrode. In this case, we're going to have chloride, bromide, or iodide is the element that will be produced at the anode. If we have any other anion other than the halide, so like sulfate, nitrate, any other anion, when they compete with the hydroxide is actually the one that is going to be oxidized at the anode. And as the hydroxide is oxidized, it will give oxygen and water. So if you have anything else other than halides, then oxygen and water will be produced at the anode. So let's have some examples. So an example is the electrolysis of copper sulfate solution. Copper sulfate solution, we're going to have four different ions: hydrogen, hydroxide, copper 2 plus, and sulfate 2 minus. And then let's have a look at the cathode. What will happen at the cathode? We're going to have the hydrogen and the copper. Copper is less reactive than hydrogen. It's lower than hydrogen at the reactivity series, in the reactivity series. So copper is the one that will be reduced to give you the elemental copper, and it will coat the electrode. So this is the cathode, and copper will coat the cathode. The half ionic equation will be copper 2 plus 2 electrons will give you the elemental copper. At the anode, then there aren't any halide, we have the sulfate and we have the hydroxide. So the hydroxide will have the priority now. It's the one that's going to be oxidized at the anode, and the hydroxide will be oxidized to give you water and oxygen. Four hydroxide ions will give you oxygen plus water plus four electrons. So and this is how the electrolysis of copper sulfate will happen. Then let's have another example. So let's look at the electrolysis of sodium chloride solution. So in sodium chloride, we will have four different ions as well. So we're going to have sodium and chloride that come from sodium chloride, and then we're going to have the hydrogen and the hydroxide that come from water. At the cathode, we have sodium. Sodium is more reactive than hydrogen in the reactivity series. So hydrogen will have the priority now. The hydrogen ion is the one that's going to be reduced at the cathode. So hydrogen will be reduced to give the hydrogen element, and hydrogen gas will be produced. So the half ionic equation, two hydrogen ions with two electrons, will give you the elemental hydrogen. At the anode, we have chloride. Chloride is one of the halide, and when it competes with the hydroxide, the chloride ions or the halide as chloride will have the priority. It's the one that will be oxidized at the anode here, and we will get elemental chlorine at the anode rather than having the hydroxide.